The morning I became important, the air itself seemed to pause, as though the village had decided to hold its breath before speaking my name. I remember the quiet most of all, not empty quiet, but the kind that listens back, the kind that makes even footsteps sound like thoughts. My name is Joy, and until that morning, I believed I understood where I came from. Our compound woke early, as it always did. Smoke lifted from cooking fires in thin, polite lines, and the scent of wet earth clung to everything after the night rain. Women moved between doorways with practiced ease, wrappers tied high at the waist, voices low and melodic. Somewhere nearby, a pestle struck rhythm into a mortar. Somewhere else, a child laughed and was quickly hushed. Nothing felt unusual. Everything felt arranged. I sat on the wooden stool beside my mother, watching her braid my hair with a care that felt ceremonial but not alarming. Her fingers were steady, warm, almost reverent, as though she were touching something fragile she did not fully trust herself to hold. She had dressed me in a clean cloth, pale in color, freshly pressed, the kind she saved for gatherings that mattered. I noticed this, but I did not question it. In our home, questions were not forbidden, only unnecessary. Outside, elders were arriving. Their footsteps carried a weight I had learned to recognize long before I could name it. When elders walked together, conversation bent around them. Laughter softened. Children adjusted their play without being told. Respect was not demanded, it lived in the air like humidity. I watched them through the open doorway as they took their places beneath the old mango tree. Faces I had known since infancy. Some smiled when they saw me. Others nodded with a seriousness that felt older than the day itself. I remember thinking, with a small flutter of pride, that I must have done something right to be looked at that way. No one said my name loudly. It passed from mouth to mouth in careful tones, like something delicate. My aunt arrived last, her wrapper darker than usual, her expression composed in that way adults mastered when they wanted to appear calm. She kissed my forehead and held my face between her palms a moment longer than necessary. Her eyes searched mine, not with fear, but with something close to gratitude. That puzzled me. "You look beautiful," she said. I believed her. The morning unfolded slowly, unhurried, layered with small gestures that seemed ordinary but later returned to me with a strange clarity. Water was brought. Hands were washed. A short prayer was murmured, not loud enough to be communal, nor private enough to be secret. I noticed how often people looked toward the river path, then back at me, as if checking alignment between two ideas. No one explained anything, and yet I did not feel excluded. I felt included in a way that made my chest warm and tight at once. My mother finally stood and smoothed the front of my dress. She did not meet my eyes at first. When she did, her gaze held a softness so deep it startled me. "You will walk with them for a while," she said gently. "With who?" I asked. She smiled, the kind of smile meant to reassure rather than answer. "You will see." I was not afraid. That is important. There was no dread in my body, no sense of danger coiling beneath my ribs. Only a growing awareness that something meaningful was unfolding around me, something larger than the ordinary rhythm of days. Children are quick to recognize when they are standing at the center of attention, even when they do not understand why. The elders rose together. Their movements were slow, synchronized by habit rather than instruction. One of them extended a hand toward me, not urgently, not forcefully, simply waiting. I looked to my mother. She nodded once. So I stood. The path toward the river was familiar, worn smooth by years of feet. I had walked it countless times with friends, laughing, racing, daring each other to step closer to the water than our parents allowed. That morning, it looked different. Wider. Quieter. As though it had been cleared not just of weeds, but of noise itself. We walked in a loose formation. I was not in front, not behind, but gently held within their circle. The village watched without following. Faces appeared in doorways, behind fences, between hanging cloths. Some people bowed their heads. Some touched their chest. Some simply watched, as unreadable. The air thickened as we neared the riverbank. The scent of water rose, metallic, alive, ancient. I had always loved it there. The river was not frightening to me. It was part of our stories, our songs, our warnings, and our comfort. It fed us. It marked our seasons. It listened. We stopped beneath the wide leaf trees where the ground dipped slightly, cool and damp even in it. The elders formed a half circle. I stood at its center. No one spoke for a moment. The silence did not feel empty. It felt prepared. An elder cleared his throat, not to command attention, he already had it, but to steady himself. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured. "This is a time of balance," he said. "A time when what is given must match what is received." I listened closely, trying to understand, trying to hold the meaning of his words the way adults seem to, turning them slowly in the mind. "Our people have always known this," another elder added. "When the path narrows, we return to what keeps us whole." Their voices blended, overlapping slightly, like threads being woven. They spoke of tradition, of care, of continuity. Of the way the past watches the present. Of responsibility. No one spoke of danger. No one spoke of loss. They spoke of honor. I felt something then, not fear, but a strange swelling sense of being seen. Chosen, even. The kind of feeling that makes your spine straighten without instruction. A woman stepped forward whom I did not recognize, though her face carried familiar shapes, echoes of people I knew. Her clothes were different, her accent soft at the edges. She smiled at me with a warmth that felt practiced but not unkind. She held out her hand. "Come," she said gently. "Walk with me." I hesitated, only because everyone was watching. My mother met my eyes again. Her face had changed. The softness was still there, but something else lay beneath it, something held tightly in place. "Go on," she said quietly. I reached for the woman's hand. Her grip was steady, sure. She did not pull me. She simply began to walk, trusting that I would follow. And I did. Behind us, voices began to murmur, low, rhythmic, almost like a song remembered halfway. I could not make out the words. The sound wrapped around my back as we moved forward, not chasing, not urging, simply present. The river came into full view, wide and patient, reflecting the pale sky. Light scattered across its surface, breaking into fragments that hurt to look at if you stared too long. We stopped at the edge. The woman beside me knelt to my height. Her eyes searched my face with careful attention, as though committing it to memory. She brushed a strand of hair from my forehead. "You are very brave," she said softly. I frowned, confused. "I didn't do anything." She smiled, a little sadly. "Not yet." Behind her, the elders began another low recitation. Their voices blended with the water's movement, with the hush of leaves, with the breathing of the earth itself. It did not feel like a warning. It felt like preparation. I stood still, listening, trying to understand what part one was meant to play. At that moment, I believed, truly believed, that whatever was happening had been decided with care, with thought, with love. I believed that the adults around me knew more than I did, and that this knowing was a kind of protection. The river glinted softly, unbothered by our presence. And somewhere behind me, unseen but felt, the village waited. No one told me when the walking would end. The woman led me away from the river path and onto a narrow road that curved through tall grasses and low trees. The sounds behind us softened until they became indistinct, not gone, just distant enough to feel unreal. I remember turning once, expecting to see my mother standing where I had left her, but the bend in the path swallowed the village whole, and there was only green ahead of us. We did not hurry. The woman walked as though time had already agreed to accommodate her. She spoke gently, in fragments, as if continuing a conversation that had begun long before I joined it. She told me her name and asked if I was tired. She pointed out birds I had never noticed, leaves that could be crushed to release sharp, clean smells. Her voice had a careful rhythm, meant to soothe rather than instruct. I asked when we would go back. Soon, she said, without looking at me. The word sat lightly between us, not heavy enough to question. We reached a waiting vehicle at the edge of the road. It was not grand or alarming, just unfamiliar. Dust clung to its sides. The door opened easily, as if it had been prepared in advance. I climbed in because nothing in the morning had taught me not to. As we drove, the village disappeared behind trees and distance. I watched until the road bent again and even the idea of it dissolved. The woman spoke occasionally, telling me small things, her favorite fruit, the way the rain behaved where she lived, how long the journey would take. Her voice never rose. She never asked me to promise anything. At some point, I realized I had not said goodbye. The thought arrived quietly, without panic, like a fact placed on a table. I considered asking to stop, to turn back for just a moment, but something in the steadiness of her presence made the question feel misplaced. I told myself goodbyes could happen later. I told myself there would be time. The road stretched on. We traveled for hours, then longer. Light shifted. The air changed. When we stopped, it was not at another village but at a place that felt less anchored to memory, buildings closer together, voices layered over one another, smells unfamiliar and sharp. The woman guided me through narrow passages and into a small compound with a low gate and a quiet interior. Inside, everything had been arranged before my arrival. A bed. Folded clothes. A basin of water. Food already warm. Nothing about it felt hostile. Nothing felt accidental either. Another woman appeared, older, with eyes that assessed quickly and then softened. She greeted me by a name that was not mine. Not cruelly. Simply as though it were already decided. I did not correct her. I did not know why, only that something inside me had gone very still. That first night, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, traffic in the distance, voices through walls, a radio playing softly somewhere. I repeated my real name silently, the way one repeats a secret to keep it from slipping away. I imagined my mother's hands braiding my hair again, the exact pressure of her fingers, the way she always paused before finishing. I told myself she would come for me in the morning. Or the next day. Or soon. Morning came without her. Days passed, then weeks, marked not by events but by adjustments. I learned where to place my shoes. I learned which water was for drinking. I learned how to answer when spoken to, how to respond without revealing confusion. I learned the shape of this new routine, how it held me gently but firmly in place. No one was unkind. That, more than anything, made it difficult to resist. The woman who had brought me began to teach me small things, how to wash clothes her way, how to greet neighbors, how to keep my voice low in certain hours. She spoke often of care, of opportunity, of how fortunate I was to be here. Her words wrapped themselves around me, not tightly, but persistently, until they began to sound reasonable. Occasionally, I asked about home. She always answered, but never directly. Your people understand, she would say. Or, this is what keeps everyone safe. Or, you are where you are meant to be for now. The phrase for now became a resting place for questions. It suggested an ending without offering a date. I began school under the new name. The first time the teacher called it out loud, my body reacted before my mind did, a brief tightening in my chest that passed when I raised my hand. The name did not feel like mine, but it fit well enough to be worn. Children are skilled at survival. I learned quickly when to speak, when to listen, when to observe without reacting. I learned which stories were welcomed and which ones caused a pause in conversation. I learned to edit myself without being told to. At night, when the house was quiet, I sometimes pressed my palm against my chest and whispered my old name once, just to feel its shape. It sounded distant even to me, like a word from a language I no longer spoke fluently. Years passed this way, not marked by any single turning point but by accumulation. My body changed. My voice deepened. My thoughts grew longer, more layered. The world widened. And with that widening came small fractures in the story I had been given. Details did not align. Dates shifted when retold. Explanations softened or hardened depending on who spoke. People reacted strangely when I mentioned my place of birth, too quickly interested, or too carefully indifferent. Records appeared incomplete. Names were misspelled. Some documents existed only as copies of copies. None of this felt dramatic at first. It felt like background noise. Still, something in me began to pay attention. Not with suspicion, but with curiosity. I noticed how adults exchanged glances when certain topics arose. How conversations slowed when I entered a room unexpectedly. How the woman who had brought me avoided speaking about the day we left, redirecting instead to practical matters. I began to understand that my life rested on a story that had been told many times, polished by repetition, smooth of rough edges. And like all stories told too often, it had lost some of its precision. The first real crack appeared years later, quietly, almost kindly. I was helping to sort old papers one afternoon when I found a folded document tucked into a stack where it did not belong. It bore a seal I recognized, though I could not say why. The date was older than the one I had always been given for my arrival. The name was spelled differently. The place listed was not the one I had been taught to claim. I did not feel fear when I saw it. I felt recognition. Not memory, something deeper. A resonance, like hearing a note that had been humming beneath everything else all along. I folded the paper carefully and put it back where I found it. I did not confront anyone. I did not ask questions. I understood, suddenly, that whatever truth existed had been arranged deliberately, and that touching it carelessly would cause it to retreat. So I waited. I learned to listen more closely. I learned to speak less. I learned that silence, when used well, could be a kind of movement. Years later, long after I had grown into myself, long after I had learned how to enter rooms without announcing fear or need, a message arrived that carried the weight of an ending disguised as an invitation. It was formal. Respectful. Carefully worded. It requested my presence at a gathering connected to my origins, to settle matters of acknowledgement and continuity. The phrasing was strange, ceremonial, almost reverent. I read it twice, then a third time, feeling something odd and steady rise beneath my ribs, not anger, not joy, but clarity. They were calling me back. And for the first time since the morning by the river, I understood that whatever had been taken from me had never fully disappeared. It had only been waiting. The road back was narrower than I remembered, or perhaps I had grown wider in ways that made everything feel compressed. Trees leaned inward, their branches knitting shadows across the path as if attempting to close what had once been opened. The driver spoke little. He had been instructed not to. I appreciated that. As the vehicle slowed, the air changed first. It carried the same damp mineral scent I had known as a child, sharp and familiar, awakening something in my body before my mind could place it. My chest tightened, not painfully, but with recognition. When the village came into view, it did not announce itself. It simply appeared, settled into the land as if it had never moved, never aged, never waited. I asked to be dropped at the edge. Walking in alone felt necessary. The first thing I noticed was how quickly people noticed me. Heads turned in stages, not all at once. Recognition did not arrive immediately, but curiosity did. I felt it ripple outward, quiet but alert. A woman paused mid-conversation. A man adjusted his seat to look more directly. Someone whispered a name that might have been mine, or might have been someone else's. I kept my pace unhurried. The compound where I had grown up stood where it always had, its walls freshly patched in places, its roof newer, but its shape unchanged. The mango tree still leaned slightly to one side, stubborn and familiar. I stopped beneath it, not touching the trunk, only standing close enough to feel its shade fall across my shoulders. For a moment, nothing happened. Then my aunt emerged. Time had altered her less than I expected. Her face carried new lines, but her posture was the same, upright, deliberate, practiced. When she saw me fully, something flickered through her expression before she arranged it into welcome. "You came," she said, as though this were uncertain until now. "I was invited." Her smile held. "Of course." She stepped aside to let me in. The gesture was courteous, formal, and faintly defensive. Inside, the house smelled of soap and old wood. Familiar, but no longer mine. Others appeared gradually, drawn by sound or instinct. Faces I recognized before names returned to me. Some looked relieved. Some wary. Some carefully neutral. No one rushed forward. No one embraced me. I realized then that my absence had not been a wound here. It had been a closed door. We exchanged greetings, polite and measured. Questions were asked that required little detail: how I had been, whether the journey was tiring, whether I had eaten. I answered smoothly. Years of learning how to speak without revealing had prepared me well. Only one thing felt different. They were watching me the way people watch a surface that might crack. Later, when the sun lowered and shadows stretched long across the yard, elders began to arrive. Their entrance was quiet but deliberate, as though rehearsed. Chairs were arranged. Water was brought. A familiar geometry took shape, one I recognized not from memory but from instinct. I was offered a seat slightly apart from the others, close enough to be included, distant enough to be observed. No one announced a purpose. Conversation moved carefully at first, touching on harvest, changes in nearby towns, disputes long resolved. Yet beneath it all ran a current of anticipation. The pauses lingered too long. Words were weighed before being released. Eventually, an elder cleared his throat. "We are glad you accepted our call," he said. "It honors us." I inclined my head. "You asked." "I came." Another elder nodded. "It is fitting. Some matters circle back to their beginning." The phrase landed softly, but its intention was clear. I let it rest. They spoke then of continuity, of keeping stories aligned, of the importance of shared understanding. They spoke as though smoothing cloth, pressing out wrinkles created by time. Their language was careful, ceremonial, layered with meaning that did not require explanation. I listened without interrupting. Inside me, something settled into place. The sensation was not anger or triumph, but alignment. I understood suddenly that this gathering was not about welcoming me. It was about stabilizing themselves. They needed me present to complete a shape that had begun years ago. As they spoke, details emerged indirectly. References to decisions made during hardship. To guidance sought and followed. To outcomes that had protected everyone involved. Each phrase revealed just enough to confirm what I had long suspected without saying it outright. No one used the word child. No one said taken. No one spoke my old name. Language, I realized, had been their first defense. I began to ask questions, not sharply, not accusingly, but with the tone of someone trying to understand a story she had inherited late. "When you say protection," I asked, "what form did that take?" A pause. A glance exchanged. An elder answered with practice calm. Protection can mean many things. Sometimes it means choosing the least harmful path. And who decides which path that is? I asked gently. Silence, brief but telling. Another voice stepped in, smoothing the gap. These are matters of the past. What matters is that balance was kept. I nodded slowly, as though absorbing wisdom. Inside, I noted the deflection. The conversation shifted, but its shape had changed. I felt it. The room felt it. Words now orbited something unspoken, careful not to collide with it. As dusk fell, lamps were lit. Their glow softened faces, but it could not soften the tension that had settled into the space like a held breath. When the gathering ended, people lingered longer than necessary, as if unsure how to leave me behind again. Some offered quiet reassurances. Others avoided my eyes altogether. My aunt walked me to the room prepared for me. It was neat, impersonal, clearly arranged with effort. Before leaving, she hesitated. "You have grown into yourself," she said. "Yes," I replied. "I had to." She nodded, as if that confirmed something she had feared. When I was alone, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the stillness surround me. Outside, the village resumed its ordinary sounds: footsteps, murmured voices, the clink of metal, the far-off call of night insects. Life continuing, unremarkable, practiced. I closed my eyes and let memory surface not as emotion but as sequence. The morning by the river. The woman's hand. The new name. The careful explanations. The missing years shaped by other people's choices. Nothing about it felt dramatic now. It felt organized. Intentional. And that was when I understood something crucial, something that settled deep and steady inside me. What had happened to me was not an accident of belief or desperation. It had been a decision. A shared one. And the village, for all its composure, knew it. That night, as I lay listening to the familiar sounds of a place that no longer belonged to me, I did not feel rage. I did not feel sorrow. I felt clarity. And clarity, I was beginning to understand, had weight. It pressed forward. It asked to be answered. Morning came without ceremony. Light slipped through the narrow window and settled across the floor in a thin, patient line, as though waiting for permission to widen. I rose before anyone called for me, dressed carefully, and stepped outside while the air was still cool enough to hold secrets. The village moved differently in daylight. Less guarded, more habitual. People performed their routines with the ease of repetition, yet I sensed an adjustment in the way they accounted for me now. Eyes lingered, then looked away. Conversations paused and resumed with altered rhythms. My presence had entered their calculations. I walked without destination at first, letting memory and instinct guide me. Paths opened themselves the way they always had, curving toward places that still remembered my weight. I passed the old well, the shade tree where children once gathered, the low fence rebuilt too many times to count. Everything had been maintained. Nothing abandoned. That, more than neglect, revealed intention. Later that morning, I was invited, gently, formally, to sit with a smaller group of elders. Not the full assembly from the night before, but a quieter circle, more intimate, more careful. This was not a gathering meant for ceremony. It was meant for calibration. We sat beneath a wide awning where filtered light softened every face. A pot of tea steamed between us, untouched for a long moment. The elder who had spoken most the night before cleared his throat again, as if resuming a sentence interrupted years earlier. "You have questions," he said. "I do," I replied. "But not the kind that need defending." That unsettled them. I could see it in the way shoulders shifted, how hands folded and unfolded. He nodded slowly. Then asked. I chose my words with care, not to conceal, but to guide. When decisions were made about my future, I said, how many people were involved? A pause. Then another elder answered, quietly. Enough to make it stand. The phrase struck me for what it was, a structure, not a number. And were those decisions written down? A hesitation. A glance passed between two of them. Some parts, one said. Others were understood. I let that sit. Understanding without record. Agreement without trace. Who benefited? I asked, not accusingly, but as one might ask about the result of a harvest. Silence stretched longer this time. Finally, a woman spoke, her voice firm but tired. Stability benefited. Order. Families who might have fallen apart if things had gone differently. I nodded, as though absorbing a lesson. And my family? Her eyes flickered. Your family was protected. Protected. The word hovered, fragile and inadequate. What did that protection require of them? I asked. This time, no one answered immediately. When someone finally did, the words came with effort. Compliance. The room felt smaller then, not from tension, but from clarity. Each answer fit into the next, forming a pattern that had existed long before I was old enough to name it. I asked about procedures. About approvals. About how the decision had been framed at the time. The responses grew more specific, less ceremonial. Pieces aligned. The story, stripped of its ornament, revealed itself as a series of practical steps taken under pressure, justified by tradition, reinforced by consensus. At no point did anyone deny it. They only softened it. At no point did anyone say they had acted alone. Responsibility, I saw, had been carefully distributed until it belonged to no single hand. When the conversation ended, it did so gently. There was no dramatic close. No raised voices. Just an understanding that something long sealed had been opened and could not be sealed again in quite the same way. In the days that followed, I began to move more freely through the village. Not as a guest, not as a child returned, but as a presence that required acknowledgement. People greeted me with cautious politeness. Some with warmth that felt newly earned. Others with restraint edged by unease. I listened more than I spoke. Stories surfaced around me, not offered directly but spoken within reach. Fragments of memory, revised and unrevised. Hints of disagreement that had once existed but been smoothed over. I learned who had argued against the decision and who had insisted it was necessary. Who had remained silent. Who had spoken too late. The shape of it became unmistakable, a collective act disguised as fate. One afternoon, I visited the small administrative office near the main road, the one few villagers paid attention to unless necessary. Its shelves held records older than many of the people who referenced them. I did not demand anything. I asked to see materials related to my name. The clerk hesitated, then complied. What I found there did not shock me. It confirmed what I already knew. There were forms bearing altered dates, signatures added after the fact, annotations that suggested revision rather than origin. A trail of quiet adjustments made to ensure coherence. Not elaborate. Just sufficient. The kind of work done by people who believed they were preventing disorder. I copied nothing. I photographed nothing. I did not need to. Understanding, once complete, does not require proof to exist. By the time I stepped back into the light, the village had shifted again. Word travels differently in small places. Not through announcements, but through tone. Through pauses. Through the way people choose where to stand. That evening, another gathering was called. Smaller than the first, but heavier. This time, I was not placed slightly apart. A chair was set deliberately among them, neither elevated nor marginal. Equal. An elder spoke, his voice steadier than before. We need to speak plainly now. I inclined my head. He continued, what was done cannot be undone. But it can be named. Others murmured agreement. I waited. They spoke of correction. Of acknowledgement. Of the need to settle matters so that they would not return to trouble future generations. Their language remained careful, but the intent beneath it was unmistakable. They were preparing to change the story. Not out of remorse alone, but necessity. I listened, hands folded, expression neutral. When they finished, all eyes turned toward me, waiting. It was then I understood the full shape of what I had become to them. Not an accuser. A key. I spoke slowly, choosing precision over force. I did not come to accuse anyone, I said. I came because I was called. And because some stories do not end when they are silenced. I paused, letting the words settle. You taught me, long ago, that balance matters. That what is taken must be accounted for. I am not here to undo the past. I am here to make it visible. The room held still. Invisibility, I continued, is what allowed everything to seem acceptable. What you named as tradition. What you wrapped in care. What you called protection. No one interrupted. If you wish to correct the record, I said, then it must be done fully. Not in whispers. Not in fragments. But in acknowledgement. Silence followed, not resistant, but heavy with decision. At last, one of them nodded. We will do what must be done. I did not thank them. That night, alone again, I sat by the window and listened to the village settle into sleep. The sounds were familiar now, but they no longer defined me. I felt no triumph, no anger. Only a quiet steadiness, the sense of standing at the edge of something irreversible. They had believed the matter finished when I was taken away. They had been wrong. It had only been paused. The announcement was not dramatic. It came the way most irreversible things do, through routine channels, spoken in ordinary language, delivered without ceremony. Notices were sent quietly. Elders visited households in pairs. Word passed from mouth to mouth with a seriousness that required no embellishment. A gathering would be held. Not a ritual. Not a celebration. A reckoning. I was not asked whether I wished to attend. My presence was assumed, not as an obligation but as a condition. Without me, there would be no coherence to what they were attempting to do. The morning it happened, the village felt subdued, as if it had lowered its voice in advance. People dressed carefully, not festively. Faces carried a restrained solemnity that came not from fear but from recognition. This was not punishment they were preparing for. It was exposure. The open square filled slowly. Elders took their places first, arranged not by rank but by age. The shift was subtle, yet deliberate. Power, once implied, had been rearranged into something closer to accountability. I arrived without announcement. No one turned abruptly. No one gasped. The acknowledgement of my presence moved through the gathering like a change in temperature rather than a sound. A space opened naturally, not imposed, and I stepped into it. For the first time since my return, I did not feel washed. I felt awaited. One of the elders rose. His voice was steady but stripped of ornament. We are here to correct what has been allowed to stand, he said. Not by excuse. Not by story. By naming. He gestured toward another elder, who unrolled a document. Its edges were worn, its surface marked by time and handling. The clerk who held it spoke clearly, reading aloud entries that had once existed quietly in storage. Names. Dates. Decisions. Not accusations, records. He read of a period of instability. Of disputes over land boundaries and lineage recognition. Of fears that conflict would fracture the community. Of a meeting held privately, where a solution was proposed and accepted. A child would be removed. Not harmed. Not abandoned. Reassigned. The words were clinical. They made no attempt to soften themselves. As the reading continued, murmurs spread, not of surprise, but of recognition. People shifted. Some lowered their eyes. Some stared ahead, rigid. Others looked at me openly now, with expressions I could finally read clearly: remorse, shame, resignation. When my name was spoken, my original name, the one I had not heard aloud in this place for years, the sound of it moved through the gathering like a held breath released. I did not flinch. The clerk continued, voice steady, recording what had never been recorded aloud before, how the decision had been framed as necessary, how silence had been agreed upon, how the story of ritual had been allowed to replace truth because it protected more people than it harmed. When the reading ended, no one spoke immediately. The elder who had convened the gathering looked toward me. "It is your right to speak now," he said. Not as permission. As acknowledgement. I stood. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I did not plead. "I will speak plainly," I said, and the simplicity of the sentence carried further than any anger could have. I was taken from this place by agreement, not by fate. My absence was made useful. My silence was convenient. The story told about me was designed to protect others from consequence. I paused, letting the truth rest where it belonged. I do not stand here to demand apology. Apologies close doors too easily. I stand here to insist on accuracy. Esther moved through the crowd. "You thought that balance matters," I continued. "That what is taken must be acknowledged. What was taken from me was not only my home, but my history. That history now returns to where it began." I gestured gently toward the elders, the records, the people gathered. "It belongs to all of us now." Silence followed, heavy but clean. Then one of the women, older, respected, known for her restraint, stood and spoke without ceremony. "We allowed fear to dress itself as wisdom," she said. "And we called it tradition." Her voice did not waver. Another stood. "We told ourselves no harm was done because life continued." Another, "We mistook survival for righteousness." Each voice added weight, not chaos. The confession unfolded communally, not as spectacle but as correction. The story was being written aloud, not erased. When the last voice fell silent, the elder who had begun the proceedings spoke again. "From this day," he said, "the account stands amended. The record will reflect what was done and why. No child will be removed under story or symbol. No decision of this kind will be made without open record and consent." He turned to me. "You are free of what was placed upon you. And you are recognized as who you have always been." There was no applause. Only stillness. It was enough. Later, in quieter hours, my parents came to me. Not together. My mother first. Her face had aged in ways I had not allowed myself to imagine. When she stood before me, her hands trembled slightly, not with fear but with effort. She did not reach for me. She did not ask forgiveness. She spoke simply. "I did not know how to save you and stay," she said. "I chose wrong." I looked at her for a long moment, taking in the weight of that sentence. Then I nodded. "I know," I said. That was all. My father came later. He spoke even less. His apology was quiet, imperfect, but real. I accepted it without ceremony, not because it erased anything, but because it acknowledged what had been denied. In the days that followed, the village adjusted. Records were changed. Stories retold. Children asked questions and were given honest answers. The myth of the water gods did not vanish overnight, but its authority cracked, and through that crack, truth entered. I did not stay long. My work there was not to rebuild or oversee or forgive endlessly. It was to return what had been taken from the story and then step away. On my last morning, I walked once more to the river. It looked exactly as it always had. Wide. Indifferent. Patient. I stood at its edge and understood, finally, that it had never wanted anything from me. It had never demanded sacrifice. It had only reflected what people chose to believe. I breathed in the damp air, steady and cool, and felt no pull to kneel, no urge to offer myself to anything. I had already been given back to myself. When I turned away, I did so without ceremony. The path opened easily this time. And as I walked, I carried with me not revenge, but something far more lasting, a truth made public, a silence undone, and a story returned to its rightful owner.